Today we will discuss the development of the face. Development of the face starts from the 4th month of the intrauterine life and it completes by the 10th week of the intrauterine life. During the development of the 4th week of intrauterine life, the embryo is totally divided into the uppermost part as a developing forebrain, which is the uppermost fold, and lower one fold that forms the pericardium. Now, in between these two folds, there is a formation of the stomatodium is there, which is also called as the future mouth. These two folds are separated by a thin membrane that is called as the buccopharyngeal membrane. Buccopharyngeal membrane actually forms the floor of the stomatodium. Now, during the development of the face, what would happen? The mesenchymal cells anterior to the brain fold, they proliferate downward and forms the frontonasal process. The frontonasal process, as it starts moving towards developing downwards direction, then there is a mandibular arch, which is also the first pharyngeal arch. It starts occupying between the pericardial as well as the brain fold in between. Now, the formation of the face is totally formed by these structures. Actually, the actual formation of the face develops from the facial primordials. We are also called as a facial prominences are there. And out of that, one is the frontonasal process, which is the unpaired prominence, and the mandibular arc, which carries the two paired prominence, which later on, if you look into the diagram D, the mandibular arc is divisible into the first as well as the second processes, that is called as a maxillary as well as the mandibular processes. Now, development of the face carries the frontonasal movement towards the medial side, and maxillary as well as the mandibular processes, they start moving towards the medial side. Once these all fused with each other, then they used to give the proper shape of the faces there. Now again we come to the diagram C. We see there is a formation of the mandibular arc is there, then there is a frontonasal process, it is also carrying towards the downward direction, and with the time what would happen, the mandibular arc divisible into the two processes, maxillary as well as the mandibular process. Now, as this process keep on going on, what would happen? The ectodermal thickenings of the frontonasal processes, what they form the lens placode as well as the nasal placodes are there. Lens placodes as well as the nasal placodes, they are the future eye as well as the nose areas are there. Now their movement of the direction is also moved towards the as the movement of the frontonasal process is there. Now if we look into the maxillary arc, you can see the fusion of the maxillary process, mandibular process is there. And maxillary process there again starts approaching towards the each other, and similarly the lens placodes as well as the nasal placodes, they are also occupying their positions towards the medial side. Now later on what would happen, if you see, the lens placodes, they used to sink at the level nearer to the frontonasal process are there, and they forms the olfactory pit. The nasal placodes, they carries the two important boundaries. First is the lateral nasal process, other one is the medial nasal process is there. Now as they move towards each other, they sink into that process, such that the movement of the eye is also at the same position. Now what would happen later on, as the process they starts approaching each other and fusing with each other, nasal olfactory pits, they ultimately fused at the lower portion, and the stomatodium, it becoming taking the shape of the primitive mouth, which is also called as a oral fissure. Now the space that lies between the maxillary process along with the part of the lateral side of the nasal pits, that forms the naso-optic furrow, but we are not taking this part right now we will discuss the development of the nasal cavity separately. So you have to just remember about the position of the maxillary process, frontonasal process, along with the other position. And then we move towards the other diagram. You can see the complete fusion of the nasal pits are there. The narrowness of the frontonasal process start. Similarly, the stomatodium, it also starts shrinking towards the medial side, and they are taking their actual shape of the face is there. Now finally what would happen, now if we look into the complete dimension, there are only the three parts which actually form the development of the face. First is the frontonasal process, second is the first pharyngeal arch, which further divisible into the maxillary as well as the mandibular processes are there. Now look into the part of this diagram. You can see this is a complete development of the face that occurs. The lower part which develops from the mandibular process carries the lower part of the cheek area, lower lip area. Similarly, upper maxillary part that is developed from the upper part of the cheek, and the lateral part of the lip is there. But the philtrum, which is the medial most bulging of your upper lip is there. This is developed from the frontonasal process, as well as the nasal septum that also developed from the frontonasal process. Now, as the covering of the skin of the upper lip, because the philtrum part is developed from the frontonasal process, so the outer skin of the upper lip, that is also formed by the part of the maxillary process, because it overcomes the portion of your philtrum part is there. Now if we look into the embryological basis of their innervation, the nerves of these all parts ultimately supplies the specific part of the face. If you look into that of ophthalmic nerve, maxillary as well as the mandibular, these all are the part of the trigeminal nerve, which is the fifth cranial nerve. Now, the structures formed by the frontonasal process, they all are supplied by the ophthalmic nerve, in which you can see your forehead is there, your nasal portion is there, they all are supplied from that. The maxillary process, it is supplied by the maxillary branch of the fifth cranial nerve, which carries the part of your upper lip is there, upper part of the cheek area is there, and mandibular process, they are supplied or innervated by the mandibular nerve, which is the third branch of the fifth cranial nerve, that is the trigeminal, and it supplies the lower lip along with the part of your lower part of the cheek is there. So in nutshell, the development of the face, again I am repeating, it starts into the 4th week of intrauterine life and completes by the 10th week of intrauterine life. It starts with the bulging formed by the mesenchymal cells anterior prior to the forebrain, which further forms the frontonasal process as a bulging which grows towards the medial side, and the first pharyngeal arch, which is divisible into the two portion, maxillary as well as the mandibular process. They start approaching each other medially and fuse with each other to form the upper as well as the lower lip, and later on forms the complete oral fissure is there. Now the nerve supplies to the specific part of these structures like the frontonasal process as well as the first pharyngeal arch, maxillary as well as the mandibular process, like the three branches of the trigeminal nerve, ophthalmic, maxillary as well as mandibular. They respectively innervate the specific areas formed by these facial prominences are there, and the ectodermal thickenings of related to the portion which forms the future eye as well as the nose, they are the lens placodes as well as the nasal placodes, and collectively their movement from the lateral to the medial side with fusion, and they later give the complete formation of the face is there.